I bought a car worth 100 grand with some elderly man's money right after my husband's funeral, Julia exclaimed with a mix of exhaustion and elation. David, her eldest son, glanced approvingly at the contract Julia had brought. Whose money are you talking about? What on earth is going on? I couldn't help but raise my voice in frustration. Despite Ashley and I mourning the loss of my husband, David and his wife seemed not only unfazed but almost pleased. The insurance money will be deposited soon. Plus, there should be an inheritance, Julia continued, pulling out an unexpected item from her bag, a bank book belonging to my late husband. I burst into laughter. What's so funny? You're planning to use that to buy. David started, but my laughter cut him off. I feel sorry for you because that bank book, I managed to say between gasps of laughter, is practically worthless now. My words hung in the air, turning the faces of David and his wife pale. My name is Amanda Simpson. I was married to Chris and blessed with 2 children, Ashley and David. Chris came from a family of doctors with both his parents holding medical licenses. Chris himself worked tirelessly from a young age to join their ranks, drawn by his admirable character and dedication. I got to know Chris through a friend's introduction, and we became a couple. Seeing Chris's dedication, our daughter Ashley also decided to pursue a career in medicine. Though Ashley wasn't naturally academically gifted, her diligence was evident every day. As her mother, I witnessed her efforts firsthand. I never pushed her to become a doctor, but Chris was overjoyed when she decided to pursue it on her own. Mom, I got an honor rating from Medical University, Ashley exclaimed one day, achieving her dream acceptance in high school. Tears welled up in my eyes at her success. It's not just an acceptance yet, I still have to work hard without letting my guard down, Ashley added humbly. I was genuinely proud to see her grow into such a kind and resilient person. However, our eldest son, David, was quite different. Born prematurely, David had always been fragile, and I might have been overly protective of him. But as he grew, he became stronger and eventually caught up with his peers physically. He excelled academically without attending any cram schools, consistently scoring perfect marks in elementary school tests. He's grown up wonderfully, I reassured myself. But in the latter half of his middle school years, David started coming home with bruises every day. David, what happened to you? I asked with concern. They're just bruises from fights. Maybe I got into some scuffles, he shrugged off my concern. He's a boy, after all. These things happen, Chris laughed it off. In hindsight, I should have listened to Chris and let things be. But my overprotective nature towards David made me anxious. I constantly questioned him about the fights and who hurt him, which only drove him away. You're so annoying. If you ask me one more time, I'll never speak to you again, David snapped at me one day. Despite Chris's advice, I kept pushing. With every bruise that healed, another would appear. All I could do was watch over him with worry. While David was academically talented, he spent most of his time fighting and eventually attended a local public high school. I hoped that as he outgrew his teenage years, he would discuss his future or college plans. But David remained unchanged. Hey, Mom, give me some money, David demanded one day with rude language. If you think acting like a delinquent makes you cool, you're gravely mistaken, Ashley chimed in, worried about her brother's behavior. Fearing for Ashley's safety, I quickly handed David a $50 note for lunch money. He clicked his tongue in annoyance and left, leaving Ashley glaring after him. How did it come to this? Did I spoil him too much? I wondered, troubled by David's behavior every day. I couldn't help but reflect and blame myself. While his classmates prepared for university entrance exams, David remained unchanged. Chris tried to talk to him multiple times out of concern, but David started hurling abusive words at Chris. He hasn't done anything that would involve the police. He's been picked up for being out late with friends more than once or twice, Chris defended David. In the end, David neither found a job nor decided on further studies and simply graduated from high school. David, what are you going to do? You can do well if you study. Isn't it better to go to college? I'm not saying you should become a doctor, but you should get a job, I pleaded with him. David wouldn't even meet my eyes. A year later, David, who had been jobless and staying at home, approached me. Hey, he began. I thought he might be asking for money again, but when I turned to look at him, David dropped a bombshell. I'm having a kid. I'm getting married. I was left speechless from the shock. But I'll start working. Can my wife and I live here? I still don't fully understand the situation. Let's discuss this with your father first, I managed to say. That night, Chris, David, and I had a serious conversation. As parents, we came to terms with David's decision to work and his determination to start a family. We decided to accept this new chapter. On the day we were to meet his wife, Chris Ashley, and I waited anxiously at home. David was late in returning with her, which worried us. We tried reaching out but couldn't get in touch. Contrary to our anxiety, they finally arrived just before 3:00 p.m. "We're back," David announced. "Wow, this place is massive. It's like a mansion." "It's nice to meet you. I'm Julia," the woman David brought home greeted us. Despite claiming to be pregnant, she wore high heels and a short skirt that seemed inappropriate for the chilly weather. Her long, shimmering nails held a plastic bag from a baby goods store. "Nice to meet you. I'm David's mother," I replied, taken aback by her appearance and demeanor. "You're prettier than what David described." "Nice to meet you, Amanda," Julia replied casually. Her behavior lacked any semblance of manners, leaving me simply stunned. "Where's my room?" Julia continued, unfazed. "Oh, we haven't decided yet." "Okay, I'll just leave the baby stuff in the living room then," Julia said, entering the house and heading straight for the living room. She greeted Chris and Ashley with the same casual tone. The checkout line was so long. "Sorry for being late. You all waited, right?" Julia remarked casually, making herself at home. Chris, Ashley, and I exchanged glances, speechless at her audacity. We had expected a simple greeting, but Julia acted as if she owned the place, placing a ton of luggage in the living room without a second thought. I greeted Julia again, noting she was 22 years old. Apparently, she worked part-time at a bar. As a child, her parents divorced, and she was raised by her father. However, he later disappeared, and she grew up in a children's home. It must have been tough without any family, but I couldn't excuse rudeness based on circumstances alone. Ashley then engaged Julia in conversation about her pregnancy. "How many weeks pregnant are you now? I noticed earlier you're wearing high heels. Your belly doesn't seem to be showing yet, but it's risky," Ashley expressed concern. I felt relieved hearing Ashley's caring words. David chimed in on Julia's behalf. "I thought the same. Julia apparently only has heel shoes. Buy her some, Mom." Suddenly, the conversation turned to me, catching me off guard. "Oh, don't be surprised. You probably don't know my taste, right? If you give me money, I'll choose for myself," Julia said without hesitation. I was at a loss for words at Julia's boldness. Ashley intervened sharply. "Why should Mom buy it? Why don't you, David? The baby inside me is her grandchild, isn't it?" "So what? It's your child, not hers," Julia retorted casually. Ashley was furious. Is this what a sister-in-law is supposed to be like? Hilarious. Chris remained silent, visibly uncomfortable with the escalating tension. What kind of attitude is this? She seems to be looking down on us even though we just met. However, we have to live together from now on. It wouldn't be wise to fight. I attempted to defuse the situation. In time, her maternal instincts will grow, and she'll adjust. I hoped aloud. When that time comes, she should naturally stop wearing heels and remove those nails. That's all I can hope for. Ashley, particularly concerned as a future doctor, added sharply, "Anyway, make sure you earn and buy appropriate shoes before your belly gets larger. Also, remove those nails if you can't manage a pulse oximeter. They'll definitely need to come off." With that, Ashley stormed out of the living room, locking herself in her room. Julia seemed amused but laughed when David reassured her. "Don't worry about her. She's just jealous because—" Before Julia and David's life together began, Julia went to work but neglected household chores, often using her pregnancy as an excuse. David would start jobs but frequently quit after arguments, causing headaches. Chris remained silent about their behavior, seemingly resigned to their ways. Unexpectedly, Chris collapsed at the hospital where he worked. Despite immediate treatment, he couldn't be saved. Devastated by his sudden passing, I found strength with Ashley's support to arrange his funeral. On the morning of the funeral, I told Julia, "It's fine if you stay home, Julia. Your pregnancy must make it hard for you." "Really? Okay, I'll stay home," Julia gladly accepted, understanding the custom of pregnant women not attending funerals in our region. Feeling uneasy, I noticed Dave texting Julia during the funeral. Though I warned him, I let it slide given the circumstances. After returning home, mentally and physically exhausted, Ashley and I discussed dinner in the living room when Julia descended from upstairs, handing some documents to David. "Tired, huh? Did your old man make it to heaven?" Julia remarked with a laugh. David joined in, saying, "Might be hell. You just came back from the funeral." What are you saying? Ashley snapped, furious. I lacked the energy to get angry. Come on, Ashley, just go with it. Julia shrugged, pointing at the documents she gave David. Curious, Ashley and I looked over the papers. What's this? What do you mean, go with it? I asked, my frustration growing. Chris has passed away, and while Ashley and I were grieving, you two seem pleased instead of saddened. We'll get the insurance money, right? And there should be an inheritance, Julia continued casually, pulling out a bank book from her bag. Dad's bank book. Julia, did you take that while we were out? That's disrespectful, I exclaimed. We live together, so it's not stealing. Besides, David knew where the bank book was, Julia retorted defiantly, glancing at David. David's silent agreement confirmed he was involved. I looked dejectedly at the bank book in Julia's hand. Chris's name was clearly written on it, but upon closer inspection, I noticed something odd about the bank book, and once I realized the cause of the inconsistency, I burst into laughter. It had been a long time since I had laughed so hard. Julia frowned at my uncontrollable laughter. What's so funny? Have you lost your mind, madam? David hurled insults at me, but I wasn't even mad anymore. All this time, I thought David was smart, but I was wrong. I feel sorry for this foolish couple, I chuckled. So, you wanted to buy a car, right? Have you signed the contract? Are you going to use that money? I feel sorry for you. Upon hearing my words, David hastily took the bank book from Julia and opened it. What the hell? There's only $3 in here, he exclaimed in shock. The couple stared at the bank book in disbelief. This is a joke. There's supposed to be an inheritance, and the insurance money should be deposited too. David fumed, echoing Julia's concern. Yes, there's an inheritance and insurance money. Both of my parents-in-law passed away early, and Chris had a lot of inherited and accumulated assets. I explained calmly. Notably, Chris wasn't just a doctor but also owned several hospitals. His total assets amounted to $1 million. However, most of those assets have been donated and are now gone. The medical fees he received from patients. He wanted to use them to help other patients. Didn't you know? He made a large donation, and it was in the newspapers. David began to tremble, realizing his ignorance of family matters and his lack of interest in reading newspapers. Moreover, the remaining money is managed in an online bank. I can't access it until we complete the inheritance procedures. What about the insurance money? When will it be deposited? Julia interjected, grabbing the bank book in a rush. Ashley, who was standing next to me, began to laugh. Don't you know, insurance money is not deposited into the account of the deceased, but to the beneficiary's account. It'll be transferred to my account and my mother's. Hearing this, Julia's grip slipped, and the bank book fell from her hands. David looked dumbfounded, and Ashley and I exchanged amused glances. What am I going to do now? I've already signed contracts, Julia muttered in disbelief. I had added so many options and they told me I couldn't cancel. Mom, please, just this once, lend me some money. David knelt beside the distraught Julia. It had been so long since he called me Mom. It felt unfamiliar, as if a stranger was asking for a favor. I don't know, figure it out yourselves. I pushed them away coldly. Today, I couldn't forgive the actions of my eldest son and his wife. I'm sure Chris felt the same. Mom, you must be tired. Let's go to bed, Ashley said, intervening. Yes, I'm not in the mood for dinner either. Ashley and I stood up, ignoring the two who were sweating in the living room, and headed to the bedroom. It seemed that during the funeral, David had been communicating with Julia about a deal. I thought they were concerned about their health, but it seemed the car was more important than their unborn child. In his lifetime, Chris always said he didn't want to leave a single penny to David and Julia. As planned, the insurance money was transferred to Ashley and me. Chris died young, and David, even after starting a family, remained unreliable. Chris had thought about what might happen after his death and left a will. According to the will, the house, real estate, and most of the remaining cash were left to me. He nominated Ashley as the successor to his hospital and bequeathed his personal investments to her. David was given a large piece of land in the countryside. As we opened the will and heard its contents, Julia said, So can't we sell the land and buy a car? Listen to the end. I interrupted Julia and continued reading. With that land and some of the cash, take $100,000 for building the house and leave this home. What does that mean? Julia exclaimed, confused. We were at the probate court. The will had been validated and carried full legal force. I explained calmly. It means exactly what it says. You get the land and money to build a house. You should be grateful. But this house should eventually belong to David, the eldest son, right? Julia looked at me as if pleading for help. I responded with a smirk. It's what I received. I decide who to give it to. You damn old woman better start packing your bags when you get home, huh? David interjected angrily. By the way, the land that Chris designated for David was about 30 miles away in the mountains. It was indeed vast but mostly untouched woodland. No matter how large the land is, if the construction cost is $100,000, the house built on it would probably be small, I remarked, knowing David and Julia, who likely had nothing, would make a fuss about the inheritance. Whether Chris gave them the land with that in mind, I don't know, but I believe Chris created an environment where Ashley and I can live peacefully. Besides, David and Julia shouldn't even have any right to receive anything. They should be grateful for whatever they can get. A few days later, a grandchild was born. Julia's water broke in the middle of the night, and she was immediately taken to the hospital after making a call. However, due to her dropping blood pressure and the hospital being understaffed at night, Julia had to have an emergency C-section. Despite repeated warnings from Ashley to remove her nail extensions, Julia didn't listen. Apparently, the nurse possibly removed them. No, I just got these done 3 days ago. Don't take them off, Julia. Don't move, the amniotic fluid is gushing out. Ashley recounted later. This confrontation was more challenging than the surgery. I've never had fancy nails like young people do, but it seems like it was painful. Julia, saved along with her child, could no longer stand up to Ashley and quickly became docile. She may have been upset about the inheritance, but she was no longer acting superior to us. I hope she's grateful that we let her rest for the first month after childbirth, Mom. Ashley said. We were wrong. Can we live here? We don't need the land or the money, David pleaded, but both Ashley and I firmly denied him. Naturally, in such a state, there was no way they could afford a car. Reluctantly, David went to cancel the car purchase and was charged a penalty fee of $10,000, which he had to pay from the $100,000 set aside for construction. Whether they were reluctant to move to the countryside or not, they thought of selling the land and renting an apartment. Still, the rent was too high for David and Julie's salaries, and there were no buyers for the vast, mostly wooded land. They realized they had no choice but to build a house on it, as stated in the will. They desperately searched for a contractor who could build a house for $90,000, but it didn't seem to be going well. The baby is still young, so I'm only letting you stay here for now. You can leave whenever you want, okay? I told them sternly. David fell silent at my words. A week later, they found a construction company, but all they could afford was a small prefabricated hut. I don't expect Julia to keep it clean, so even a small house should be fine. I told the couple who were preparing to move. You'll need to decide on daycare. Until you're settled, I can take care of the baby. You both should become independent as parents first. You're taking our child, you monster. Julia snapped at me angrily. Even with just my earnings, it's impossible to support the two of them. Let's leave our baby here till things settle, David reasoned with Julia, who was furious. No way. I'll divorce you then, Julia threatened, but David calmly replied, even if you do, you still will have a home. Realizing the futility of arguing, Julia quietly packed their things, and they left. I felt sorry for the baby, but having parents like that might not make much difference. Of course, if they changed their ways, it would be best for the baby to be raised by her own parents. But I can't help but think that the baby might be happier being raised by Ashley and me, I reflected. David and Julia, who moved to their new land, contacted us almost every day. If it was about the granddaughter, I was happy to reply. But all they ever asked for was money. When ignored, they sent pictures of snack bread for dinner. Ashley laughed when she saw this. Even if they ruin their health, they won't be able to afford medical bills, Ashley chuckled. In the countryside, a car is essential. They're currently driving the used car they bought for $3,000, which frequently stalls, I noted. They might be saying this to gain our sympathy, but they don't know it's just a laughing matter for Ashley and me. They probably won't be able to take their daughter back in this situation, but I think it's okay as long as we can live with our adorable granddaughter, Ashley added. As she turned 3, she proved to be very cute, kind, and nothing like David or Julia. She was a hard worker. Ashley bought her a number puzzle, and she eagerly learned numbers and could already read letters. David and Julia are still living day by day. Occasionally, when they receive pictures of their daughter, they exclaim, "Super cute," as if looking at a stuffed toy. Ashley remarked, "It still seems impossible for the two of them to become parents. When the granddaughter grows up, I hope she can learn from her parents' mistakes and grow up strong."